So the great Paulogia has made a video on morality. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't quite get it. I participated, he posted a question on it up on Twitter, and I played along just for fun. And then I realized that all of a sudden he had these, not necessarily douchebag atheists, but kind of douchebag atheists, jumping on me and going, I don't really get what he's getting at. When he starts off his moral video, he lays down what is potentially the weakest Christian moral argument for God out there. Sort of a variation on the William Lane Craig, if objective moral values exist, then God exists. Objective moral values exist, therefore God exists. It's sort of a variation on that argument. I think it was Frank Turek, and he says, if you're an atheist, you're borrowing from us, we the Christians, to have any type of moral code whatsoever. Well, but this is true of everybody under the sun. There's no such thing as a moral code that isn't from some source. So any moral code would be sourced out to either a philosophy or a religion or something. So it's a terrible argument for the existence of God. It's kind of like saying, if you're an atheist, how are you doing math? It's a variation on a precept argument, but a really weak one. How are you doing math if you're an atheist? Because you don't have any, your world falls apart. It doesn't really work. Just like there is objective mathematical truths, and an atheist is perfectly capable of discerning those truths and, working his checkbook, they're also perfectly capable of discerning right from wrong without necessarily predicating it on having read the scriptures and studied the scriptures and knowing the scriptures. So I don't really get what he's getting at. And as I've argued in the past, the atheist framing device of well-being is insufficient, but it's perfectly acceptable. Well-being is a perfectly acceptable grounding for morals. It's just insufficient. There's a little bit more to it than just well-being and how to maximize well-being for me, the person, and for society at large. But the real thing with Paulogia's video is the strongest possible Christian argument for morality is more of a Peterson-esque one. The one that he put out there is, as far as I'm concerned, the weakest one. I never use it. I don't think it's a successful argument. So I'm sort of with them on that. But the strongest possible one, I think he might disagree with too. And it's more of a Peterson-esque one. And it isn't necessarily an argument for the existence of God. It's an argument for the necessity of a transcendent morality, regardless of whether you believe in God or not. Peterson is not necessarily a Christian. He's not necessarily a believer. But he argues the necessity of transcendent morality because you need, keyword, something to predicate the moral grounding on, that we in the society all need to agree, yes, these particular morals, values, and ethics are straightforward, non-negotiable. They're not up for debate. They are transcendent to one degree or another. Now, people mostly tie that in with the deity, but Peterson doesn't necessarily say you have to. But you do have to have a transcendent set of moral principles that are non-negotiable, else your society will struggle and will be unhealthy and morally flawed or challenged, so to speak. So, for example, I don't know if that quite made sense. For example, Declaration of Independence. We believe these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed by who? By what? By their Creator, with certain inalienable rights. Life, liberty, and pursuit and happiness. The key words, Creator and inalienable, non-revocable. Predicating it on God is another way of saying it, saying that these rights are God-given, hence intrinsic. That's really what we're getting at. Not necessarily it's an argument for God, but an argument for transcendent intrinsic rights. Because if they are not given to you by God, hence intrinsic, then they are given to you by the only other option, which would be man, which means they can be revoked. That's a much stronger argument for the type of moral framing that we generally refer to as religious. But it isn't necessarily an argument for the existence of God. It's an argument for non-negotiable principles, values, and ethics that are intrinsic. The only way of usually saying it is God-given, Because if something is God-given, that means it's intrinsic to you by virtue of the fact that you're a human being and you're born. Now, that type of moral framing device is Judeo-Christian in origin. That's why Jordan Peterson makes a strong argument for the necessity of religion. It's more an argument from a secular point of view about the sociological utility of religion. It's a much stronger argument, but it isn't necessarily an argument for the existence of God. And I'm not entirely certain if Paulogia would agree with it or not. So, I don't get it. I don't get what he's getting at. I don't get what he's trying to say with this video. I don't use the argument that he cites because I don't think it's a successful argument. An atheist yes, an atheist needs to borrow from a moral code, but so does every human being. You don't just have morals. You look to source and go, okay, those are the morals I agree with, those are the morals I align myself with. Every single solitary human being has to borrow from a moral code. We the Christians are even borrowing from a moral code. Yeah, it's the Bible, but I didn't write it, and neither did any of the other Christians. We're just practicing it to the best of our ability, sort of. So I'm not 100% sure exactly what Paul's getting at. I'm not sure what he's trying to ask. If there's a universal, the Christian moral teachings, for example, the Christian ethics of humility, love your neighbor as yourself, be Christ-like, all of those would maximize well-being in an individual and the society at large. I don't know that there's any such thing as outside of that. The only thing that I would say is an argument for Christianity is the Christian argument's a little bit deeper in that it's saying that you, Paulogia, and even I, Craig, without the power of the Holy Spirit. See, what Christianity isn't actually arguing that these morals and values and ethics are innate. It's arguing the opposite, that we are all fallen and sinful. And if left to our own innate devices, we are going to yield to the flesh. So you, an atheist, may decide completely in your heart that the values, ethics, and teachings of Jesus Christ are correct, but you aren't going to have the power to enact them in your own life or embody them in your own life outside of the influence of the Holy Spirit. That's the argument from Christianity. Now, that's not necessarily an argument that people like Frank Turk are making. But their argument is weak. I'm with Paul on that. Their argument is lame. The argument from the Bible itself is that Paulogia might agree with me, Craig. Might say, yes, Craig, I think it's better for a person to be humble. I think it's better to be merciful. I think it is better to turn the other cheek when someone harms me. I think it is good to be Christian. I think Christian values and ethics are good to practice. But the argument of the Bible is outside of the enabling power of the Holy Spirit. You aren't necessarily going to be able to yield to them because your flesh is going to dominate. You might want to practice them, but you will not be able to without the power of prayer and placing your body under subjection to the promptings of the Holy Spirit. That's kind of the argument of Christianity, but that's not really what Paul was talking about. So, like I said, I don't really get it. I don't really get what Paul was driving at. I struggled with it when I answered it on Twitter, then immediately regretted it. It was like, because I got these, let's just be perfectly honest, douchebag atheists debating me over, I'm not even sure what they were trying to debate. Oh, it always the same thing. Oh, see how superior secular ideas are? Yeah, okay, whatever. Whatever, fella. Yeah, you really proved it. See how worthless the Bible is? I don't get what he's driving at. I think he would agree, and almost any sane, reasonable atheist that I know would agree, that there are certain moral precepts in the Bible, certain principles that the Bible lays out that are worth practicing, worth embodying in your life. That if you lay them down and you live according to them, nobody would argue with you. You'd be a benevolent human being. You'd be a good person. That's what the Bible is telling you to be, so that you see my good works, praise the Father who is in heaven. The only argument that's different is that Christianity makes, that Frank Turk wasn't making and William Lane Craig doesn't make, but it's in the Bible, is that without the power of the Holy Spirit, you might want to embody or live out those values, but you aren't going to be able to because your flesh is too strong. And the demands of your carnal nature are going to supersede whatever intent you may have in your heart. Because you are fallen, sinful. That's the argument from the Bible. That without the power of God, you aren't going to be able to enact the values and ethics, even the ones nearest and dearest to your heart. But of what those values and ethics would be, I sincerely doubt Paul and I would have much, there'd be a lot of disagreement between us. There wasn't that much between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson was making the argument that I'm talking about in the Sam Harris-Jordan Peterson debates. And there isn't really a lot of disagreement between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson as to what those values are. Sam Harris is an atheist, but he has a universalist ethos. Probably Paulogia does too, which is that these particular values are non-negotiable. These are profoundly important to society. These are profoundly important to human functioning. Free speech, inalienable rights, universalist ethos. Generally speaking, those are predicated on the existence of God, that each man is made in the image of God. Can you make a different framing for them? Probably. Do those prove that God exists? No. But they prove the sociological utility of religion, which is, as I said, the far stronger argument. So there you go. That's my first take on the video. Yeah, it's all over the place. I don't really know. I don't really know what to make of what he's arguing. So that's the best I can do for now. That is all, kids. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.